Hey everyone, today we pick up with the aftermath of Stephen's murder. Saul was in full agreement with Stephen's murder. At that time, the church in Jerusalem began to be subjected to vicious persecution. Everyone except the apostles was scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. Some pious men buried Stephen and grieved deeply over him. Saul began to wreak havoc against the church. Entering one house after another, he would drag off both men and women and throw them into prison. Those who had been scattered moved on, preaching the good news along the way. So if you go back to chapter 1 of Acts, we actually saw kind of like a strategy, a game plan from Jesus of how the good news would be spread. It would start in Jerusalem, then Judea and Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth. But the apostles haven't actually been doing that. They've been just holding up in Jerusalem this whole time. And so I wonder, some might read this story as, well, God was punishing them for not doing what they were supposed to do. If that were true, that would make Stephen, who was described as filled with the Spirit, into some sort of sacrifice. And I don't see that as a good reading of this story. Instead, what I see here is the way that God can bring good out of bad situations. All right, true spiritual growth, it usually doesn't happen when we're really comfortable. We need to be disrupted somehow, either usually by great love or great suffering. And it's not an automatic process. It takes actually spiritual maturity to let those experiences, both of love and suffering, to make us more open instead of more closed. But what we see here is that God is always working toward good. We even see that with this new character that's introduced, Saul of Tarsus, later to be known as Paul. Yes, he is doing terrible things here, and he's doing them in God's name, which is often how some of the worst things in history have been done. People that think they're working for God and are actually working against them. But God's not done with Saul either. In fact, has a good purpose that he's going to be able to carry out. It doesn't minimize the terrible things that Saul does. And when we think that to try and see that God is doing good in our situation, it doesn't minimize what we're going through either. I've heard a quote, it's been attributed to lots of different sources. It says, everything will be all right in the end. So if it's not all right, it's not the end. Right? We don't ignore our grief and our pain, but we also don't assume that that's the final word. The final word belongs to God. And so when we're scattered, whether that's physically or mentally or emotionally or spiritually, follow the example of these disciples and tell the good news on the way.